Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started.
This is episode 38 of Changing the Face of Yoga. I'm interviewing Marcie Leek, who teaches tender populations, or people who are in pain physically or emotionally or mentally, and the techniques she uses to bring ease to them when they take her classes or her online courses or her workshops. So let's listen to Marcie.
This is Stephanie Cunningham with Changing the Face of Yoga, and my guest today is Marcie Leek. And Marcie is a 500 level yoga teacher and has been teaching yoga in Seattle, Washington, in the United States since 2012. She is trained in the viniyoga tradition, and her primary focus is what she calls tender populations. I love that term. People who are facing challenges of one kind or another. Currently, she works with cancer patients and caregivers, plus-size women, and people who are grieving. And I love what she has to say about yoga. I love bringing yoga to people who think they can't do it for one reason or another. It is a pleasure to see my students realize that not only can they do yoga, but that yoga can bring them some measure of ease in often unexpected ways. Welcome, Marcie. So glad that you're on the podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that introduction?
No, thank you for the welcome. And I think you pretty much covered it.
Okay, great. I'm not real familiar with the viniyoga tradition, shall we say. Could you kind of explain that to me and to the listeners that may not be very familiar with it either?
Viniyoga is a type of yoga that it focuses on four, I call them sort of hallmarks. So one hallmark is that we prioritize the health of the spine, and therefore we have specific sequencing principles that we use in any kind of class. So whether I'm doing a class on a mat or a chair yoga practice, I follow these sequencing rules that I've learned that prepare the spine for what's coming and then help compensate for what has come. Another hallmark is we dynamically move in and out of a posture before we stay in it. So I know some types of yoga move right into a posture and stay there, and perhaps even stay there for extended periods of time. Whereas in viniyoga, we would move in and out several times, the idea being that the muscle is warm first, and then we stay in that posture to get the static stretch. Another really important focus in viniyoga is the connection between breath and movement. All our movements are choreographed to the breath. There are certain things we do on inhale and certain things we do on exhale generally, but we might change that up for a given effect. And then the last, which is really important for the people that I teach, is we adapt postures to fit the person or the person's abilities. So for example, if someone's body isn't able to do this type of forward bend, I know adaptations that I could give to a person that they could try so that they're still getting the effects of the forward bend, even though their body might be a slightly different shape. And so those are sort of the principles.
Great. So you individualize yoga as much as you can for each person's body and ability. Okay, great.
Correct.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Could you expand a bit on the spinal issues? Could you give me some examples of what you mean when you say that you're very aware and careful of the spine?
Well, yes. I don't want to get too technical. Well, maybe I will, because I think maybe a lot of yoga teachers are listening to this. So
yes, that's usually who is.
So we sort of think of the forward bend as the great compensator, I'll call it. The back bends and laterals and twists we wouldn't move from one of those to the next without a forward bend in between. The idea being that the forward bend can bring the spine sort of back to neutral after you've been in a strong lateral. And so we go in and out of a forward bend to bring things, the muscles around the spine, back to basic foundational starting point. Before then, we would move into a twist, or before we would do some other posture that is not a forward bend. So that's the gist of it, is that the sequencing principles, number one, it's called the hub and wheel. And the hub is kind of, for in our language during teacher training, the hub, I would say, is the forward bend, and the outside of the spokes on the wheel would be things like laterals or twists or back bends. And we wouldn't go on the rim of the wheel from one to the next. We'd always go back to the hub before we would then sequence in a different kind of posture. So that's one. And then there are also the progression from starting on the floor or in a chair. And then if we're going to standing, we would work through kneeling and prone poses and kneeling poses before going up to standing poses. And then we come back down and we have a specific progression as well. All of that builds in taking care of the spine and getting it ready for the stronger work, and then bringing it down after the strong work so that it gets ready for rest and shavasana.
Okay. I was taught to start with standing poses. It sounds like you wouldn't do it that way, or am I incorrect?
Yeah, that's right. No. Well,
No.
I think the theory is that many Americans lead a sedentary lifestyle. So many Americans are sitting rather than having an active life where they're already standing. If someone had been on their feet or moving around or exercising, probably I could start with a standing posture and work my way down to rest. But the general assumption, if I'm teaching a basic class, like a drop-in class, or even many of my series, when I do a check-in at the beginning of the class, many of my students say, my back is killing me. I've been sitting all day. And so starting on the floor with the more gentle postures sort of bears in mind that the likelihood of people having been sedentary and really needing to warm up their back before coming into the stronger standing postures, it's because of that, I'll say, assumption.
Yeah, that's probably a good assumption. I agree. Okay. What I really was fascinated by was the absolute diversity of students that you have. And I kind of wondered how you got to this point, because you're teaching cancer patients and their caregivers, plus-sized women, and people who are grieving. I'm sure there's some things that are similar among those populations, but to me, there's a lot of differences too. So can you kind of, explain a little bit how you got to these three different kinds of populations?
Sure. And then I'll really throw a wrench in it, because my latest population is knitters.
Okay. Well, not surprising given this this particular group here. So we'll talk about knitters too. Fine.
It's all come sort of naturally. I've also taught teachers, because my first group was teachers, actually. I teach English as a second language in addition to yoga. So I started with the teachers, and as I've gone through my advanced training, there were groups that I wanted to investigate. And cancer patients and caregivers came about. My mom was an oncology nurse, and who ironically ended up getting cancer. And so both oncology professionals and cancer patients and caregivers, all of that group, I have sort of a place in my heart for that. And an opportunity came up as I was finishing teacher training, where residents here in Seattle needed a yoga teacher. And I wasn't quite done yet, but I got the call and I said, I really want to do this. And can you wait for me for a couple of months? And they did. And it was great. And I've been working there for the last 4 years. And, I didn't know what I was doing at the beginning. I knew yoga and I knew how to teach yoga, but I really like researching. And so I researched, how can I most effectively help caregivers who are in this situation where they're living with their patient and they have almost no time to themselves, and learned how to help them calm down. And I mean, the the principles, the yogic principles are the same that we've all learned. It's just learning how to apply for a given audience or population, I think. So the cancer patients will potentially, depending on where they are in treatment, need a much different and much gentler practice than if I just ended up having caregivers come to class. So each time I go teach those classes, it's a mystery as to who's going to be in the room because they come if they can, you know.
Yeah.
So I would choose a group and research it and teach it for a while, and then I'd add another group. I am a plus size woman, and so that came really naturally to me to want to serve that population, and I really enjoy it. I enjoy creating this space where, you know, women who maybe don't think they fit the yoga mold can come, and it's this sort of protected environment because it's plus size women in that room. There's nobody else. So the tendency to compare or judge themselves is lowered. And then when they finish that course or finish it a couple of times, my hope is that then they have the confidence to check out other classes. So I could use my body experience, obviously, with that group. And then there are some trainings. I took 2 online trainings from women, one in Canada and one in the US, who have made their careers of teaching plus size yoga. So there's always research out there. And because I like school and I like academics, I tend to gravitate towards things that I can learn myself and then teach others. And then the grief class was sort of my capstone in my advanced teacher training. I realized before we even started, some friends of mine went through some loss and it triggered my own loss. And I emailed my teacher and I said, you know, can grief be my focus? And she said, absolutely. So I had practically a year of time to research for that class and build it to be a series that I really love and that really brings people ease, like I said.
Can we explore a couple of those areas? I would think it'd be very difficult to teach cancer patients because, as you said, they're on a range of things happening, you know, from the very beginning out to maybe 5 years after the treatment. And I would think that they would have very different needs during all of that time period. How do you, if you're unaware of who's going to show up, and obviously there's going to be times when they just don't feel like it, how do you judge that? How do you decide what to do each time?
Well, the first job I got with the Cancer Care Alliance, it's in an apartment complex for people who are going through treatment at that time, and it's bone marrow and blood cancers. If those patients come, I know that they're, you know, either leading up to their transplant or within 100 days, because after 100 days, they get to go home. And that is quite a range. And I've seen quite a number of, I'll say, ability levels, whether it be mental or emotional or physical. And that's where viniyoga has come in for me, because I have ideas in mind. And it might be as simple as, you know, if a patient comes in a really weakened state, they know they have full permission to, if they just want to sit and breathe with us and just follow along with the breath, because, you know, in viniyoga, we deepen the breath and we focus on the breath. And so that might end up being their practice. Or they might only do certain portions of the physical part with adaptations of what they can do, and then just sit quietly when they realize they're nearing their capacity for the evening, whether it's been 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 or 30 minutes. They are also, you know, they're in charge of their bodies and they know they can leave or stop at any point if they want to. And then my job is to coach the movements or the meditations or the breath work in a way that encompasses the bodies that are available in the room. The classes are not huge, fortunately, so that helps me in what I have to think about to offer. But yeah, it is kind of like being on the spot. And it was really hard at first. And I've adapted, I guess.
You must be very creative to be able to walk in and think, okay, now I've got to do, you know, this is what the group looks like today. So I'm going to have to modify in all of these different ways. And I think that's difficult. But I do think it gets easier over time, but it's still not an an easy way to teach yoga. So I congratulate
No,
you.
it's not. And I still have literally now I'll have moments where I'll be coaching something, and then a part of, maybe I've been tired that day, or a part of me is like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, what am I going to think of next? Like, can I even do this? But I know so far anyway, I've always been able to serve them. And so, yes, I am creative and I love creating, and I've learned to handle the stress of figuring out what I'm going to do basically the night of for that class.
And how do you handle that stress?
Well, my practice. I mean, my practice helps me. And I say that it took a long time, even as a yoga teacher, before I truly felt like I had a practice that I understood the importance with my personality and my energy. I need a consistent practice that it's nourishing to me, and it's adaptable based on what I feel that I need on a given day, but it always includes certain things, and it helps me stay steady. So really, that and trusting that this is the right thing are how I deal with it.
No, I understand that. Sometimes things feel right, and if they do, usually it's easier than if you're a little unsure about whether you should be doing something or not. So I can understand that very well. My podcast is very much like that. It started off as for some reason, some business reason, and now it's become much, much more important to me because I love talking to people, and I love getting their passions out in yoga about what they love to do, and it's just very soul satisfying to me to do this. So yeah,
it is. And whereas what's gratifying for me is to help the students who come to my classes. I mean, you have a whole world of students if you think about those of us who are listening to your podcast, because there's so much to learn. Everyone new that you have on is a new voice to approach yoga from a different direction, and it's really fun.
Yes. I love it. I really do. Okay, so we've talked about the cancer and the plus size. Oh, and the knitters. We haven't talked about the knitters.
And the knitters.
Yes,
and the knitters. Well, I had the opportunity maybe a month or so ago to teach yoga at a Vogue Knitting Live conference here in Seattle. And it was, I love to knit, and it was so much fun to go and teach those knitters. I just had such a great time. And one of my expansions in my yoga world is online work. And I promised some of them that I would start creating some online yoga for knitters practices so that they can help those muscles that get all clenched up. And some of them are actually the same as when you're grieving. So they can help open their chests and expand their muscles and move their arms and their legs and their hips. Because of course, when you're knitting, you basically focus on your hands and your forearms and looking down. Yeah, it's really fun. I'm excited to see what's going to come of that.
You're basically going into some online courses, or have you been doing that already?
Well, last year I experimented with the Befriending Your Body Through Yoga plus size online class, and I ran it a couple times, and I got some really good information from that. And so actually right now, as in this month, I am expanding it so that at the beginning of the year, it will be available again. And it's a 6-week course adapted for online rather than in the yoga studio. And then next year, the Moving Through Grief with Yoga course is also going to be an e-course. And the knitters, I haven't masterminded a course. The knitters at this point, it'll be yoga for knitters, short videos and sort of quote unquote class practices or longer videos so that they're available for them too. It's really fun. I used to work in theater. And so I have found returning to that sort of, it's not the same as doing a show, but it's really fun, and it's back to that creative thing again.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to those thoughts about your tender populations?
That's a good question. I just, in my life, I have found yoga to be such a nurturing element or piece or practice, I guess. When I lost my mom, and there were a couple of other events that happened really rapidly after that, I did not have a way of coping with that kind of loss on that kind of level. And I tried therapy at that time, and I wasn't even ready for talk therapy. And I certainly wasn't ready for the subtleties of yoga, because yoga can be very subtle. But over the years, obviously I've come to learn and understand yoga better. And I just really find teaching these groups, these people, especially people who are in some kind of, I'll say pain. It might be physical, it might be emotional, it might be mental, it might be spiritual, in some state where they are tender. And I've found that the classes that I offer can bring them ease. So they come to class and they've had a terrible day, or they're feeling vulnerable, or their hip hurts, or, who knows. And they leave with more relaxation about them, or maybe smiling or chatting in the lobby, whereas at the beginning they were absolutely not chatting. And it just brings me a great deal of satisfaction that I am able to facilitate that sort of change in 90 minutes. It's just really remarkable to me, and I love helping them learn how yoga can help them.
I wanted to talk specifically right now about, you're in Seattle, Washington in the United States, but at the end of February, you're going to be in partnership to give a workshop for daughters that are grieving their mothers. But let's talk a bit about that, because I think I've known several women who almost fell apart when their mother died, and it was just a massive blow to them. And so I can see where this is something that could definitely be needed. Could you just kind of explain it in a little more detail? I just read what was on your website.
So there is a therapist here in Seattle named Paige Tangney, who I was sending her flyers about my Moving Through Grief with Yoga series that I do, the 6-week series. And she contacted me and she said, I really like the idea of what you do, and I like the way you present yourself in these letters that you've sent me. And she has been doing I think it's maybe a 10 or 12 week therapy group for women who have lost their mothers. And she's been doing this for about 10 years. And her schedule is always packed. And she said she was brainstorming and trying to figure out how she could offer it to more women, because you're absolutely right. There is a need for women who have lost their mothers to have ways to process or let go or cope. So her proposal to me was, would I be interested in working with her on an intensive workshop? So we have banded together, and we're offering this workshop in February and again in May. And it is very intensive, but it will include activities that Paige has done in her groups, and as well as yoga and breath work and meditation that I have done in my grief groups for yoga. I'm not a therapist, and I tell my students I'm not a therapist, and I don't know how to counsel in that way, but I do know how that yoga can help people when they're grieving. And so Paige will be leading the more, therapist-y parts of the weekend. And I will be plugging in yoga practices throughout, and then having a longer practice on the long day, particularly to help women, as they go through this really big process in a very short amount of time. Their bodies are going to be full of different things depending on who they are, but definitely their sympathetic nervous system is going to be busy, and they may be full of adrenaline, and their minds may be racing. And of course their bodies will be sitting and maybe clenching. And so my part of the workshop is both to help them understand how yoga can help them as they're grieving their loss of their mothers, but also to facilitate some of that during the workshop as well.
So you're providing yoga tools for them
I
so
am
that
indeed.
they can take that home and if they
Yes,
feel that way again, they can say, okay, now I can breathe or yeah,
absolutely.
that
Yes.
sounds good. I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
We're almost towards the end. And is there anything that you would particularly like to add we haven't covered?
I'm not sure how much I talked about the actual grief class that I teach, the Moving Through Grief with Yoga, the general class, as opposed to the Daughters Grieving Mothers weekend. I guess just a couple of things so that listeners know, yoga is widely accepted as a physical exercise, which it is, as you know, there is an aspect of yoga that is for the physical body and it can help. And when you're grieving, there are patterns, holding patterns in our body that we tend to gravitate towards. Some of them are visible from the external point of view, and some of them are inside, like tightening our gut and holding stuff in. And the physical part of yoga can really help with that. But also physiologically, when you're grieving, you're in fight or flight mode, basically. And I think most people have an understanding of what that means. And the tools of yoga, especially pranayama, the breath work, can help people shift away from the fight or flight mode into the relaxation response mode, which I think is really useful for people to know. And then also meditation can help in the mind, because the mind is, when you're grieving, you're often projecting forward with concern or worry, or thinking backwards with regret or sadness or fear, rather than being present in the present moment. And meditation can help practice, getting a little distance from those tendencies to be in the future or the past, and to just help us be here and recognize that here has certain qualities, and they may not always be comfortable, but gaining the distance or the different perspective in meditation can help us cope with them a little bit better. And so I would just encourage anyone who is grieving, or who feels tender for that matter, any of the populations we've talked about, or any tender population that we haven't talked about, to seek out a yoga therapist or a yoga class that they feel may help them as they go through their tender times.
Okay, great. I would add that if you are in a tender situation, that you do a little research about how the teacher or the class that you're looking at teaches, because there are many different philosophies in yoga, and some would be more appropriate for someone who's in that position than others. And so I just would be, just do a little research is the only thing I have to say.
I agree 100% with that. Find out, if a studio primarily has classes of one lineage over another, or one kind of yoga over another, make sure you have an understanding of what that is. And most studio owners or managers would be happy to answer those kinds of questions if you email them or call them before you go. And yeah, doing research is super important, because if you're in whatever state you're in, if you end up in the wrong kind of yoga, it may end up agitating you when you want to calm, or it may ask you to be in a quiet, still situation when you really need to exert some energy and get the energy out of your body. So yes, Stephanie, I totally agree with that.
If you would like to contact Marcie, either to talk about any of her classes or her online courses or her workshop in February, she's at Marcie, and it's Marcie at nourishingbreathyoga.com. And her website is www.nourishingbreathyoga.com. Her Facebook is Nourishing Breath Yoga also. And her Instagram is NBY Marcie Leek. Marcie seems to have a lot of knowledge in some specific, but still many different areas, and obviously could be of great help to someone who's feeling tender. So if any of you are in the Seattle area or on the online course may sound interesting to you, it sounds like Marcie might be a great resource. Thank you so much, Marcie, for the interview. I really enjoyed it. I think I learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you for that wonderful interview. Please download and subscribe to the podcast on my website, which is www.yogalightness.com.au. To give a review of the podcast, you can go to iTunes, and the address is bit.ly/CTFOY, all in caps. And I would greatly appreciate your leaving a review of the podcast. If you would like to contact me, you can send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. So thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Let me know your opinion on them through the review process on iTunes. And subscribe if you'd like to know when each new podcast comes out. Thank you again.